Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the Realms of Chaos. I know it's beating up a dead horse. Plenty of people have expressed their dislike of Realms of Chaos and gone over the many issues that the Realms of Chaos do have. But given the fact that Creative Assembly keeps developing content for the Realms of Chaos, I do have to wonder how many of their decisions in terms of balancing, how many of their decisions in terms of design, even with DLC, are determined by the state of the Realms of Chaos. Because suffice to say, the Realms of Chaos are not a great portion of the campaign map. But as long as Creative Assembly develops content, I think it is relevant to keep talking about them. Now, for my part, and I've expressed this in the past in previous videos, I believe that the Realms of Chaos should be ignored going forward. It does seem with Shadows Change that they put in less effort to the Realms of Chaos, and they gave us the entire narrative campaign for the DLC lords, be it Astankia, Jan Bod, or the Changeling in Immortal Empires. In fact, if you're playing Jan Bo, the narrative aspect of the campaign can end up feeling better, as opposed to just starting in Cathay, conquering all of Cathay, and then spending dozens and dozens of turns having to make your way to take Uskolak and to take the Dragonfang Mount. It isn't a great experience that he has to deal with. And this is coming from the Lost God prologue campaign. So one of the big disappointments with the Realms of Chaos is that a lot of us, when Warhammer 3 came out, we played the Lost God campaign. Sure, it was very easy for any kind of experienced player in Total War, but it was certainly a really good narrative experience. People have compared it to the Scourge of Lordaeron campaign in Warcraft 3, and there are certainly similarities, well, more than a few similarities between Yuri and Arthas, though you could also make that comparison with Archaon. Regardless, you did have a fairly strong narrative campaign there, a mini campaign over there. It was very boring in the sense of gameplay, like the gameplay aspect of Sandbox, as it were. The map wasn't really that great, but as a tutorial campaign and as a narrative-focused campaign, it did work well. And when it came to Realms of Chaos, well, let's just say the disappointment was quite very significant. Like, consider Yuri. I think actually he's been wiped out now. He's still around, though Village might have put him on defensive. Like, you can consider Yuri over here, who is going by the name of Crow Brother. Vashinar. Oh, okay. We're using that name. All right, fair enough. Consider Yuri, like how much story potential he had and how they made him an aimless, pointless character in Realms of Chaos. Forget the joke that he is in Immortal Empires. He's not really in a great state in Realms of Chaos either. And I do have to wonder if Creative Assembly's decisions with regards to the demons, be it Nakari, Skarbrand, Kugath, Kairos, and the lack of changes that you've implemented for these legendary lords, all of which, with the exception of Skarbrand, and honestly that depends on your perspective. I believe Skarbrand doesn't need significant changes in his campaign. Other people are like, he's just fine, you just don't know how to play him. Whatever. But I think the point I want to get to here is, like, a lot of the races, actually all of the initial races of Warhammer 3, with the exception of Grand Cathay, have not ended up in a great spot, one way or another at this point. Like, Kislev is still bad, the demons are still bad, the ogres are considered the worst race by the community at large in the game, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. And I do have to wonder if that's related to the design of the Realms of Chaos campaign. Because in Realms of Chaos, if you're playing Realms of Chaos properly, in the sense that you're focused on the narrative, actually taking a significant amount of territory as I have over here. Like, if you look at my campaign situation, I control 11 provinces, 28 settlements. And certainly this was a crazy walk, if you will, with Katrin over here. I almost lost everything several times over. I almost went bankrupt a dozen times, pushing myself to maintain 4 armies that I currently have at the moment, some of which have taken quite a bit of damage over here. But when you consider this army, like 3,400, you consider how much gold you earn, like even something like Sylvania, which has a literal gold mine, is only generating 2,000. So one single province as good as Sylvania is not capable of paying for even a single army. You need multiple provinces in order to do so. And of course, the more you expand, the more factions you encounter, hostile factions in particular, and because you don't have the resources as the baseline factions to maintain a lot of armies, you just end up, well, kind of in this situation surrounded by enemies on all sides, fighting for your very survival. Or you could play a more defensive-oriented campaign, but that is pretty boring because what you'll end up doing is clicking the send turn button a lot, not having much to do for like 30 turns, and then you go in, oh joy, into the Realms of Chaos. Actually, Catherine's going to be going back there again. I got a soul from the Realms of Chaos. I went into Slaanesh. I didn't take the rewards from Slaanesh. And then you have to wait 30 more turns, and then 30 more turns, and 30 more turns. The early game is, like, if you're trying to build an empire like this, yes, it is certainly quite brutal slog, but once you get past those 30 turns, once you establish a solid enough presence, like my eastern flank is covered by the dwarves. Yes, I'm at war with Astrogoth. I'm not worried. I've got Catherine and Boris Ursus over there. Also in alliance with both Zufbar and Caracadrin, so I think I'll be quite fine with respect to that. Even if I have to send Catherine through the World Edge Mountains to beat up Astrogoth, I think I'll be quite fine over here. But what are the problems? What are the issues? Well, the narrative itself is not that strong, and not necessarily in the quality of the writing itself, but how you end up playing it. Because all you do is like we wait 30 turns, you go deal with a realm of chaos, whatever one you decide to deal with. Then you have to wait 30 more turns. And in total, you need to wait at least 122, because the first one actually 125 turns in order to even access the ending. Suffice to say, 125 turns is very, very long. On pretty much any difficulty, it ends up being a slog. In every campaign I've played of Realms of Chaos, trying to beat them, and that's kind of the intent over here in this particular campaign. I wanted to see how it would be. You get bored by about turn 60, 70 or so. Even if you do use the portals to just teleport your legendary lord to another major area of the campaign map, even if you do something like that and start expanding there with all the risk associated with that, you just end up like, the early game ends up being brutal, but like once you get going, it's like, even as Kislev, it ends up being a very dull grind where you just, at certain points every 30 turns, you just have to take your main army for about 10 turns to deal with one of the fucking realms. And yes, it is a horrible campaign experience to deal with that. Although you can always use the portals to just show up at the capital of, say, Scarbrand and wipe him out if you so desire, if you want to make your life a bit more exciting. But certainly the portal mechanic has not aged well, to the point that Creative Assembly has basically removed it for every campaign they developed since then, be it the Champions of Chaos, the Chaos Dwarves, or the Shadows of Change DLC Lords. But without the portals, the campaign just feels dry and lifeless. At least the portals can add a bit of excitement because, hey, demonic armies, even if your campaign performance ends up tanking whenever the portals spawn because you get these rogue armies showing up all over the place, even if your campaign performance ends up tanking and in turn timer ends up significantly increasing, at least it can add some excitement. Like, let's say if you're playing Xiaoming or Miaoying, and once you've unified all of Cathay, there's very, very little to do. Well, with the exception of defending the Great Bastion. And apparently Miaoying over here is doing her best impression of screwing up again. Not surprising, though. I think Yan Bo and Xiaoming will be quite fine over here. Greasus has built himself a massive empire, and Astrogoth, well, the Chaos Dwarves are the Chaos Dwarves. What can you say? But it can end up feeling very dull, especially because in order to get any kind of challenge, let's say you're playing Cathay, the only suitable territory you have outside of Cathay is in the Empire. So it doesn't hurt factions that can take any territory as much, but the factions that are limited by territorial considerations, like Kislev, like Cathay, they will have issues in their campaign, and again, you just will end up with nothing to do. In fact, the best thing I could do in this campaign is just like pull back to the 3 major cities of Kislev, throw a stack on every single one of them, and annihilate the hordes of hell that are gonna descend on me. And that would give me enough money. Hell, I could even fall back to Kislev City itself, and no one's taking Kislev City at this point. You could have an endgame crisis showing up over here at Kislev City, as long as I have an army like under Catherine, or 2 armies, one under Boris, one under Catherine. There's no way to lose this particular campaign. All well on my way towards confederating Castalted, by the way. Though it's still probably going to take 15 more turns, to be honest. I mean, it's turn 51. I've been exceptionally aggressive, and I'm barely close enough to 400. So what, that's like turn 90, I'll be able to confederate Castalden. That's a great experience. People don't understand why I have an issue with the supporter system. Imagining doing the very best you can in your campaign, constantly invoking Urson, constantly taking significant portions of territory, and then still having to wait 90 turns. For what in Immortal Empires might be your short campaign victory condition. So, like, there's a detachment, I guess, like, between Creative Assembly and the way people play this game, in the sense, like, Creative Assembly thinks we're fine playing 100-turn campaigns. We might be, if those 100 turns would actually be interesting to play for, or if they were very fast. But neither of those is the case. There's not really all that much interesting happening on the campaign map for a lot of turns, but at the same time, it's still a grind, because you do still have to manage your empire, you still have to conquer lands, you still have a lot of battles to play through, and so on and so forth. It isn't a great campaign experience to have 125 turns that you have to waste. That's a lot of hours of your life, even if you're playing on a very low difficulty. Let alone if you're playing like me on something like Legendary, that ends up obviously being a significant slog. So there's certainly an issue, and I think, like, with a narrative campaign like this, Creative Assembly needs to realize we are not fine as players to waste so many turns just because they put in an artificial turn timer. Say what you will about the ritual, the Vortex ritual in Warhammer 2. If you could get enough scrolls quickly enough, you could do it pretty damn quickly. Now, granted, you still probably would spend 100 turns or so on that, but at the same time, the ritual only screwed you over when you started the ritual and you got those rogue armies, and you could plan and prepare for that. That's what made it better. Beyond the ritual aspect, because Creative Assembly has moved on with the rifts, the problem is the map itself is not really great. I don't know what they thought about making it a square like this, kind of a square with, corner captions like factions like Scrag, Nakari, Cafe, and even the Castors you could consider, like Drazov has this nice little corner for himself. I'm not quite sure what their intent behind that was. I don't know how they thought this was going to work brilliantly. Like, as a sandbox, this map doesn't work all that well, unless you have no climate limitations, which casts don't have. But if you do have climate limitations, it plainly sucks. Like, if you're playing as Kislev, consider this. Yes, you can take the mountains, you can take the frozen wasteland, but then even as Kislev, you're going to end up in a situation where the only thing you're going to really do is either fight the dwarves, fight the chaos dwarves, or conquer the empire. Suffice it to say, the easiest choice out of all of those is to conquer the empire. Surprisingly, yes, the empire, one of the worst factions in the game, is the best one to conquer. That's one of the problems with the empire being weak, I might add. So as a sandbox, it's not really that great. I want to consider, like, the Vortex map. Just the map, not the ritual, nothing like that. Just the map that we had in Warhammer 2, the base map that they developed for Warhammer 2, was substantially better. You had the diversity in climate, but each faction had enough territory that they could be satisfied. Sure, there were certainly limitations because of the map and certain issues that cropped up because of that map, but one of the things that I think worked well for the Warhammer 2 map is, like, you look at this map and the distances between settlements are not necessarily that much greater in quite a few cases than they are in Immortal Empires. In some cases, they are far greater, like Kislev is far larger, but, like, the Empire is not in a great spot. Cafe is not in a great spot. In fact, the Cafe map of Immortal Empires is vastly superior to the Cafe map that we have in Realms of Chaos. So the map itself doesn't work quite well, and either you're playing a faction or a legendary lord that can steamroll things, like all the DLC ones that have been introduced in the game, with the exception of the Ogres, the Day 1 DLC ones, or you're playing a mediocre or bad faction. Kislev is, in this context, decent. I emphasize the decent aspect. with respect to this, but you can really feel the limitations when you're playing some of these races. Like, again, Kislev's economy is not in a great state. This has been known since day one of the game's launch, I might add. It's not like me harping on about how bad Kislev and their economy are is any new information. People have known that since the game came out, and yet Creative Assembly has done nothing in this entire period of time to resolve that situation. From their perspective, it's probably fine to have a limited economy, regardless of all the issues that does cause when you're trying to play a, conquering global conquest, which is certainly what I'm trying to do here. Or I could just click this end turn button for 60 more turns and win the campaign, because there's no way I'm going to lose Kislev or Prague at this particular point. Erengrad, that's a different discussion. I do need to send an army over there. Might just make a deal with Scrag, and it's like, okay, you can have Reichland, you can have Hochland, just leave me the hell alone. Go beat up some elves. We can have the green wood elf menu together, if you so desire. I'm sure Scrag would take that deal. Interesting lore perspective, the entire empire being butchered by Kislev and ogres is, well, I guess very appropriate from the perspective of Creative Assembly. No, it's just a very silly map. And I've played campaigns of Realms of Chaos. This is just the latest example of it, but like I do have this campaign, turn 81, as Jan Bo. There's a console command mod there that I disabled here. 81 turns. Do you think that it was interesting? No. Cafe, like, at least at Kislev, at least playing in this campaign, there were twists and turns. Valkia showed up and annihilated one of my armies, and now she's about to annihilate the dwarves. I think she also has, well, an Exalted Hero of Khorne, because, of course, she has an Exalted Hero of Khorne. But there were certainly some twists and turns, whereas with Jan Bo, and honestly, Cafe in general, it ends up being very boring. In fact, like, you think Jan Bo is ridiculous in Realms of Chaos? No, Xiao Ming is ridiculous in Realms of Chaos, because you can take over all of Cafe very quickly, and then you don't have to waste all the turns having to traverse the mountains more and Darklands. You can just teleport in the Empire, start the conquest of the Empire as Xiao Ming. Not limited by climate, so you can actually achieve more in a Miao Ying or Xiao Ming campaign compared to Jan Bo. Sure, Jan Bo does have the better economy, but all the same. It's one of those few cases, but Cafe is the exception, it's not the rule. What about the Chaos Dwarves? Well, the Chaos Dwarves inherently do have to wait some time in their campaigns to build up their industry armaments, but yeah, once they start steamrolling, they steamroll, and to be honest, all the DLC campaigns, be it the Champions of Chaos, Chaos Dwarves, and now Shadows Change, they were all pretty awful. I think, like, there was this nonsense idea, or this myth, if you will, that the factions of Realms of Chaos, the AI factions, were somehow stronger. They weren't. They just were. The Legendary Lords were just spread out enough that AI factions controlled by Legendary Lords would not encounter each other quite as often, because if they did encounter themselves as often as they do in Immortal Empires, you can bet your ass that they would achieve very little even on this map. They do achieve more because it's the minor factions they steamroll over, and major factions get stronger benefits, so you get the idea of what ends up happening in Realms of Chaos. The map is just not as cluttered by Legendary Lords, and that's certainly something that helps them out. But like, in terms of dealing with them, in terms of the challenge that major and smaller factions pose, it's like, yeah, Valkia has one army showing up here. It's like, I'll just throw the bear, literally, at her and win. I don't care what she has, like, Boris Ursus will win that particular battle over there. Actually, one of her armies was already wiped out by the dwarves, though I think she sacked Helpit at one particular point. Still, not a great campaign, dynamic design in any way, shape, or form. And I think going forward, if we're thinking about, like, how could Creative Assembly design narrative-focused campaigns, like, that's one of the things that I'm interested in. Because, like, you have the Lost God campaign that was really good for what it was, for a tutorial campaign. I think a more focused campaign, of course, you would have the sandbox map. Like, that's a thing. Like, this is the issue, really, ultimately. It's like, if you want a narrative campaign, it should be on a special map for that, with special rules for that. For a sandbox, it should be different. The problem of Realms of Chaos is Creative Assembly has been trying to fit everything together in the same spot, and you end up in this pisshole that we currently have in the Realms of Chaos campaign map. It is quite disappointing to play on this map, even to this day. Like, it just isn't a well-designed map. Like, it's trying to do everything at the same time. It's trying to be a sandbox, but also have narrative. It's trying to accommodate the Legendary Lords. It's obviously built to accommodate larger Legendary Lords, so to account for DLCs. I'm sure Nagash, if he gets added as the DLC, is going to be in Sylvania. I can already see how he would be implemented. But I cannot imagine any campaign that they add would be a better experience at the moment. Like, every campaign that they would add would end up being quite terrible, which is not something that you can say about the Vortex campaign. Like, once you start getting into the DLC lords that didn't have to worry about the ritual, like once you had DLC lords that didn't have the ritual, the Vortex campaign map worked quite well. Sure, it wasn't the Grand Mortal Empires map, but there were reasons to play it. There are no reasons to ever play Realms of Chaos again unless you just want to blitz through to see the cinematics. That's the only reason that you would bother with Realms of Chaos. And I do hope that Creative Assembly does do what they did with Shadows Change going forward for Thrones Decay, that they have the narrative aspects also in Immortal Empires. Though I think it should be a toggle, not something you deal with every time you start a campaign. That's the thing. Creative Assembly does. This is one of the things that screwed over Free Kingdoms, believe it or not, because Free Kingdoms did the same stupid thing, which is like, oh, you know, all the stories surrounding these characters, it's like the narrative campaign, so to speak. That was present on the same map. Now, you could ignore it, but obviously you didn't want to. There were significant reasons why you'd want to go for the narrative campaign for all the rewards. So I think some kind of toggle with respect to that would have been very welcome. It's also something that hurt Troy. I think Creative Assembly needs to stop trying to fit in both a heavy narrative camp focus, or whatever narrative they do decide to go for, in the same sandbox map. Like, narrative campaigns should have their own map, like Napoleon did. Like, say what you will about Napoleon Total War, those mini campaigns were pretty great. Lost God shows you can do something similar as well there. I understand that people hated the Beastmen and the Wood Elves campaigns, but that's because they were just poorly designed, not because the concept of a mini campaign doesn't work. It can work. It can be fun. It's just how they handled those things in Warhammer 1 for Wood Elves and Beastmen. Like, in case you haven't paid attention, Creative Assembly has changed a lot in terms of the quality overall from Warhammer 1. Say what you will about Warhammer 3, I think we can all agree that it's a far better game than Warhammer 1 in general, in every respect. Well, maybe not some of the aspects of auto-resolve, but still, overall, it is a vastly superior experience. Well, with the exception of the map, because this map is just not a great one. It's pretty amazing to think of the fact, like, what were they thinking with this map? Like, I can't really figure it out, really. There are some good portions of it, sure. I think the Darklands are mostly okay. Partly because they redesigned the Darklands with the Forge of the Castors, but the Empire is in an awful state, all crammed together, trying to make them fit in this portion of the campaign map, and well, Kislev is, I guess, appropriate for all the issues they have, and yeah, Norska and the Realms of Chaos, or the Chaos Waste, not in a great position either. And let's not even talk about Cafe. Like, trying to make everything fit in the same map didn't end up working, and hopefully they have learned this lesson and won't repeat it. That doesn't mean I think they should abandon narrative-focused campaigns. They shouldn't, but they should do them properly. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.